Hi everybody. So today I read a blog post on martinfowler.com where he sort of rehashed some refactoring work that he'd done in his refactoring book in JavaScript, and it got me to thinking about my favorite refactoring story from my career. This takes back a few years ago when I was working on a project that was essentially an implementation of a state machine. And the way that we got requirements from the customer was in terms of the transitions between the states. So basically what this system did was it kept track of some pieces of information that represented a schedule of events that were going to happen, and every minute it would wake up and it would query the database. It would figure out if any of the schedule items needed to transition to a different state in the schedule, and then write those results back to the database. And we spent a few weeks on it. A lot of that time was gathering the requirements and putting it together, and we modeled the entire domain on the state transitions because that's the way that we got the information in from the customer, and that was what they seemed to care about. We did a really great job of writing a good test pyramid set of tests. We had very, very robust unit tests. We had sufficiently robust integration tests, and we had a couple of end-to-end tests to govern all this. It was a REST API on the front end, so we didn't really have any UI tests. And when we got down to the very end of the project, it was the very last requirement that we had to add, and I needed to touch something like 8 or 9 Java classes to implement a one-point story. And it got me to thinking that maybe we had done something wrong, or maybe there was something that could be improved in the design of this. And so what I asked my PM, I asked my Scrum Master, I think we were calling him at the time, if I could have a day or two to review the code, possibly refactor, and see if I could make anything better. And he said, "Well, why? We're done. We're about to hand this off to support. It's going to go into production. You don't need to worry about it anymore." And I said, "I just don't feel comfortable with the 15,000 lines of code that represents this feature." Given how hard it was to add one little piece to it. I said, we've got good test coverage. I'm confident that if I make any changes, we'll be okay. So I spent about 2 days solo on it, and just sort of looking at it from a few different angles, thinking about how we could model it. And one of the things that I realized was that each schedule entity could at any point in time calculate what state it should be in. And so I started writing a little bit of code in the schedule object itself to calculate what state should it be in now, rather than run through a whole bunch of rules in this sort of state rules engine that we had put together. And it turned out that when you did it that way, it was very, very simple to determine what state you needed to be in. And I think I consolidated the 15,000 lines of code down to, I don't know, maybe a couple thousand, several hundred. It was a dramatic, it was more than an order of magnitude reduction in code. And as a result, of course, most of the unit tests went away with it, but the integration tests, I kept the interfaces the same at the top level API. So the integration tests still ran and all passed 100%. And so I presented this to the rest of the team, and everybody said, yeah, this looks like it's great and it works. And I showed the Scrum Master. He wasn't extremely technical, so he really just couldn't believe that it could be that simple. So we handed it off to our QA team, which was a separate team, and we had a very fun adversarial relationship with them. They loved finding bugs in our stuff, and we loved proving that they weren't really bugs. And they spent about 2 days going after this thing to try to figure out how, what could I have done wrong, because no one could believe that it could be reduced in code that much. And they found 0 bugs. And and like I said, we had integration tests, so I knew going into the testing cycle that we were going to be fine. And so we deployed it to production. It worked great. Everybody was happy, especially the support people that were left to handle this after we handed it off to them, because now they had a dramatically smaller product to maintain. And the reason that I love this story, and the reason that I tell this story, it's not a brag, and it's not because I feel like I did anything particularly insightful, except to recognize that the red-green refactor cycle and that notion of reviewing your work doesn't end when you're feature complete. And in fact, that's the best time to do it. It's when the concept is freshest in your head. You actually have the best understanding end to end that you're ever going to have of how that piece of functionality works. And so you're in the absolute best position to leave that piece of code in the best state it can be in. And this is something that we routinely don't do. We get done with a feature, we move right on to the next one. And yes, there's schedule pressure, and yes, there are a lot of reasons that we don't do it, but it's something that is really worthwhile to make time for because, as it turns out in this case, a few months later, they needed an enhancement to this, and my team got tagged to provide the enhancement. And in the words of one of my friend James's, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he basically says, you should always code like the next one to look at that code as a homicidal maniac who knows where you live. And in this case, I was that maniac. I knew where I lived, and I was really, really grateful that I left myself a piece of code that I knew how to understand. So just a thought to everybody is consider that refactoring is not just an intermediate step as part of the development cycle, nor is it only a preparatory step for making changes to a legacy code base. It also should be the final step when you're closing out a piece of functionality in order to leave it in the best state that you can for the next person, because you never know, the next person could be you. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Hit me with any comments or any other good stories that you have about refactoring, either here on YouTube, on Twitter at Kevin_M_Hickey, or head over and check out my blog at kevinmhickey.com. Thanks a lot.